The chandeliers above the grand ballroom sparkled like 1,000 tiny suns. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter floated through the air. The kind of laughter that only comes from people who have never worried about paying rent or choosing between groceries and electricity bills. Elena Vasquez moved between the round tables covered in white silk, balancing a tray of champagne flutes on her right hand. She had been working at the Harrington Country Club for almost 8 months now. 8 months of smiling at people who looked through her like she was made of glass. 8 months of pretending she didn't notice the way some guests treated her like furniture. But she needed this job. She needed every single dollar. Back home, her grandmother was recovering from her 3rd surgery. The medical bills had piled up so high that Elena sometimes woke up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, doing math in her head. Her younger brother, Diego, was in his final year of high school. He was smart. Really smart. The kind of smart that deserved a future. A college degree. A chance at something better. So Elena kept her head down. She wore the black uniform. She smiled. She served. Tonight was different from the usual Friday crowd. Tonight was the annual charity gala. The biggest event of the year. 300 of Manhattan's richest and most powerful people had gathered under one roof. Businessmen, politicians, celebrities, old money families who traced their wealth back generations. The tickets alone cost $50,000 each, and at the center of it all stood Richard Harrington III. Everyone in New York knew his name. He had built one of the largest tech companies in the world before he turned 40. Magazines called him a genius. Television hosts laughed at his jokes. He owned homes in 6 different countries and a private island somewhere in the Caribbean. But the staff at his country club knew a different side of him. Richard Harrington enjoyed power. Not just having it, but showing it. He liked to remind people where they stood in the world, compared to him. He tipped well when he was in a good mood. But when something displeased him, his temper was legendary. Elena had seen 3 waitresses quit in tears over the past few months. One of them had been fired on the spot because she brought him the wrong wine. Tonight, he was in high spirits. He stood near the stage at the front of the ballroom, surrounded by admirers who hung on his every word. His suit probably cost more than Elena made in a year. His watch definitely did. Elena kept her distance. She worked the tables near the back, refilling glasses, collecting empty plates, staying invisible. That was the goal. Invisible was safe, but life has a way of changing in a single moment. It happened around 9 o'clock. Elena was carrying a full tray of red wine toward a table near the windows. The room was crowded. Guests moved unpredictably, stopping suddenly to greet friends or pose for photos. Elena navigated carefully, her eyes scanning for obstacles. She didn't see the woman until it was too late. The woman stepped backward without looking, right into Elena's path. Their bodies collided. The tray tilted. Elena tried to catch it. But gravity was faster. 3 glasses of red wine tumbled through the air and splashed across the woman's dress. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Elena stared in horror at the dark red stain spreading across cream-colored fabric. The woman looked down at herself, her mouth opening in shock. The people around them gasped. Then the screaming started. "What have you done?" The woman shrieked, her face twisted with fury. "Do you have any idea what this is? This is a Valentino. This is custom made." "I'm so sorry," Elena stammered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see you step back. Please, let me help you clean. Don't touch me." The woman recoiled, like Elena was carrying a disease. "Get away from me." The commotion drew attention from across the room. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. And then, cutting through the noise like a knife, came a voice that made Elena's blood run cold. "What's going on here?" Richard Harrington pushed through the crowd, his eyes scanning the scene. He took in the ruined dress, the wine on the floor, the trembling waitress with the empty tray. His expression darkened. "She attacked me," the woman cried, pointing at Elena. "This clumsy girl threw wine all over my dress." "It was an accident," Elena said quickly. "She stepped back and I couldn't stop in time." I'm truly sorry. I'll pay for the cleaning. Or, pay for the cleaning? Richard Harrington let out a cold laugh. Do you even know what you've destroyed? That dress is worth $40,000. Elena felt the floor shift beneath her feet. $40,000. It might as well have been 40 million. I don't have that kind of money, she whispered. Obviously. Richard Harrington looked at her with something close to disgust. He turned to scan the room, and Elena saw something change in his eyes. A spark of amusement. The look of a man who had just thought of something entertaining. Ladies and gentlemen, he said loudly, his voice carrying across the ballroom. It seems we have a small situation here. The crowd drew closer. 300 pairs of eyes focused on Elena. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. Richard Harrington walked to the stage and picked up the microphone. The band stopped playing. The room fell silent. This young woman, he announced, gesturing toward Elena, has just destroyed a $40,000 dress belonging to one of our honored guests. An accident, she claims. Perhaps. But accidents have consequences, don't they? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people looked sympathetic. Most looked entertained, like they were watching a show. Now, I'm a fair man, Richard continued. I believe in giving people chances. So, here's what I propose. He pointed toward the corner of the stage, where a beautiful grand piano sat under a spotlight. It was there for decoration mostly, though sometimes a hired pianist played during dinner. Play something for us, Richard Harrington said. Entertain my guests. If you're good enough, if you can impress us, I'll personally forgive the debt. The full 40,000, gone, just like that. Elena stared at him. Her heart hammered against her ribs. And if she refuses? Someone called out from the crowd. Richard Harrington smiled. It was not a kind smile. Then I suppose she'll be paying off that dress for a very, very long time. And I'll make sure everyone knows why. Laughter erupted from several corners of the room. To these people, this was entertainment. A poor waitress being put in her place. A reminder of the natural order of things. Elena's manager appeared at her elbow, his face pale. Just apologize and walk away, he hissed. I'll try to smooth things over. You can't seriously. Well? Richard Harrington's voice boomed through the speakers. What's it going to be? Can you play? Or are you just another face in the crowd with nothing special to offer? Elena looked at the piano. Her chest tightened. She hadn't touched those black and white keys in 7 years. 7 years since the worst night of her life. 7 years since she swore she would never play again. But as she stood there, humiliated in front of 300 strangers, something stirred inside her. Something old. Something that had been sleeping for a long, long time. She thought of her grandmother lying in that hospital bed. She thought of Diego and his college dreams. She thought of her parents, and what they would say if they could see her now. Her feet began to move. The crowd parted as Elena walked toward the stage. Whispers followed her like shadows. She could feel their eyes on her back. Their judgment. Their amusement. Richard Harrington watched her approach with a satisfied smirk. He thought he knew exactly how this would end. A few clumsy notes. Embarrassed silence. The natural order confirmed. He had no idea who she really was. No one in that room did. Elena reached the piano and sat down on the bench. The keys stretched out before her, familiar and terrifying all at once. She placed her fingers on the cool ivory, and she began to play. The moment Elena's fingers touched the piano keys, the world around her seemed to fade away. The whispers of the crowd became distant. The glare of the chandeliers softened. Even the smug face of Richard Harrington blurred into nothing. All she could see were the keys, black and white, stretching out before her like an old road she had once known by heart. Her hands were shaking. She could feel her pulse throbbing in her fingertips. The last time she had sat at a piano, she was 19 years old. A different person. A different life. That night came rushing back to her now, whether she wanted it to or not. She had been at Juilliard, the most famous music school in America, the place where only the best of the best were allowed to study. Elena had earned her spot there through years of hard work, through thousands of hours of practice, through a gift that her mother had recognized when Elena was barely 4 years old. Her mother. The thought of her was like a knife in Elena's chest. Rosa Vasquez had been a music teacher at a small community center in the Bronx. She didn't have money or connections, or any of the advantages that most successful musicians had, but she had ears that could hear talent like other people could see colors. And when she heard her little daughter picking out melodies on a broken keyboard they found at a thrift store, she knew that Elena was special. From that day forward, Rosa dedicated everything to nurturing her daughter's gift. She worked double shifts to pay for lessons. She found scholarships and programs for underprivileged children. She sat beside Elena for hours every single day, patient and encouraging, never pushing too hard but never letting her give up either. Elena's father, Miguel, supported them in every way he could. He drove Elena to competitions on weekends. He recorded her performances on an old video camera. He sat in the front row of every recital, tears streaming down his face, so proud that his heart could barely contain it. Together, the three of them built something beautiful. By the time Elena was 10, she was winning national competitions. By 12, she performed at Carnegie Hall, the most legendary concert venue in the world. The newspapers called her a prodigy, a once-in-a-generation talent. Music critics said she didn't just play the piano, she spoke through it. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be. And then, one rainy night in November, everything ended. Elena was 19. She had just finished her first semester at Juilliard. Her parents were driving home from watching her perform at a student showcase. The roads were slick. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel. The police officer who came to Elena's door said they didn't suffer. He said it was instant. He said those words like they were supposed to bring comfort. They didn't. In one moment, Elena lost everything that mattered. Her mother, who had believed in her when no one else did. Her father, who had sacrificed so much to give her a chance. The two people who had shaped her entire existence. Gone forever. And with them, her music died too. She couldn't play anymore. Every time she sat at a piano, she heard her mother's voice. She felt her father's hand on her shoulder. The notes that used to flow through her like water became trapped somewhere deep inside, locked away behind a door she couldn't open. She dropped out of Juilliard. She moved back home to take care of her grandmother and her younger brother Diego, who was only 11 at the time. She took whatever jobs she could find. Waitressing, cleaning, retail, anything to keep the family together. The years passed. The bills piled up. The girl who had once played for presidents and millionaires became invisible. Just another face in the crowd. Just another person trying to survive. 7 years. That's how long it had been since she touched a piano. And now, here she was, sitting on a stage in front of 300 strangers who expected her to fail. A billionaire watching with a cruel smile, waiting for her humiliation. The weight of $40,000 pressing down on her shoulders. Elena stared at the keys. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She couldn't do this. She couldn't play. The music was gone. It had been buried with her parents. And she didn't know how to bring it back. But then she thought about what would happen if she walked away. Richard Harrington would make her life miserable. He would make sure she never worked in this city again. The debt would follow her like a shadow. And Diego, her sweet brother who had worked so hard, who had just gotten accepted to 3 different colleges, would have to give up his dreams because she couldn't protect him. She thought about her grandmother, lying in that hospital bed, fighting every single day just to stay alive. That woman had raised Rosa. She had watched her daughter die, and still, she smiled at Elena every time she visited. Still, she held her hand and told her everything would be okay. How could Elena give up when her grandmother never did? And then, cutting through the fog of her fear, she heard her mother's voice. Not a memory this time. Something deeper. Something that felt almost real. Music is not about being perfect, mija. It's about being honest. Play what you feel. The rest will follow. Elena closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. The crowd was getting restless. She could hear shuffling feet, quiet laughter, whispered comments. They thought she was frozen with fear. They thought she had nothing to offer. Richard Harrington leaned toward one of his friends and said something that made them both chuckle. He checked his watch. He was already bored, already thinking about how he would tell this story at future parties. The stupid waitress who thought she could play piano. But something was happening inside Elena. Something was shifting. She thought about her mother's hands, guiding hers across the keys when she was small. She thought about her father's face, full of wonder. Every time she played, she thought about all the music that had lived inside her for so long. Waiting in the darkness, patient and quiet. It wasn't gone. It had never been gone. It was just sleeping. Elena opened her eyes. Her hands had stopped shaking. A strange calm settled over her, the kind of calm that comes when you've already lost everything and have nothing left to fear. She knew what she was going to play. It came to her like a whisper from somewhere far away. Chopin's Ballade No. 1-inch G minor. One of the most difficult pieces ever written for piano. A piece about loss and longing and the beauty that can exist in the middle of pain. Her mother had taught it to her when she was 15. They had spent months on it together, working through every phrase, every emotion, every tiny detail. It was the last piece they ever completed before the accident. Elena had never performed it in public. It was too personal, too precious, but tonight, she would play it for her mother, for her father, for the girl she used to be, and the woman she had become. The crowd didn't matter. Richard Harrington didn't matter. The debt, the humiliation, the stares, none of it mattered. This was between Elena and the music. Between Elena and her parents. Between the past and the present. Finally coming together, after 7 long years. She positioned her fingers over the opening notes. She could feel her heart beating, slow and steady now. Like a drum keeping time. The room was silent. Everyone was watching, waiting. Some of them waited for her to fail. Some of them waited out of simple curiosity. A few, perhaps, waited with something like hope, wondering if maybe, just maybe, there was more to this young waitress than met the eye. Elena didn't care what any of them thought. She pressed down on the first key, and the music began to flow. The first note floated into the air like a question. Soft. Hesitant. Almost. Fragile. Elena's finger trembled slightly as it lifted from the key. For a terrible moment, she thought that was all she had. One note. One lonely sound that would fade into silence while 300 people watched her fail. But then came the second note. And the third. Her fingers began to move on their own, guided by something deeper than thought. Muscle memory, people call it. But it was more than that. It was like her hands remembered a language her mind had tried to forget. The opening of Chopin's Ballade. No one is quiet and uncertain. Like someone waking from a long dream. The melody wanders, searching for something it cannot name. It builds slowly, carefully, each phrase leading into the next, like footsteps on an unfamiliar path. Elena played those opening measures with her eyes closed. She was afraid to look at the keys. Afraid that if she thought too hard about what she was doing, the spell would break and her hands would freeze again. In the crowd, people shifted in their seats. A few exchanged glances. The woman with the ruined dress whispered something to her husband. Richard Harrington folded his arms across his chest, his expression unreadable. They were waiting for the mistake, the stumble. The moment when this foolish waitress would prove that she had no business sitting at that piano. But the mistake didn't come. Instead, the music grew stronger. Elena's fingers moved faster now, more confident. The melody that had started as a whisper began to rise, filling the vast ballroom with sound that seemed too big to come from a single instrument. Something was changing in the room. The chatter that had continued near the back tables went quiet. Glasses stopped clinking. Even the servers paused in their work, trays balanced on their palms. watching the stage with wide eyes. Elena didn't notice any of it. She was somewhere else entirely. In her mind, she was 8 years old again, sitting on a piano bench that was too tall for her, her feet dangling above the floor. Her mother sat beside her, patient and warm, guiding her through the notes like they were walking through a garden together. "Feel it here," her mother would say, pressing a hand to her heart. "Not here." She would tap Elena's forehead. "The music doesn't live in your brain, Mija. It lives in your soul. Let it out." Elena had spent her whole childhood learning to let it out. And now, after 7 years of keeping it locked away, the door was finally opening. The middle section of the ballade arrived like a storm rolling in from the sea. The gentle wandering melody transformed into something fierce and passionate. Elena's hands flew across the keyboard, striking chords that rang through the air like thunder. The rhythm pushed forward, urgent and relentless, demanding to be heard. A woman in the front row gasped. She was elderly, dressed in elegant black, with silver hair pinned up in a careful arrangement. Her hand flew to her mouth as she leaned forward in her chair. Her name was Catherine Webb, and 60 years ago she had been a professional pianist herself. She had performed with the greatest orchestras in the world. She had met legends, shaken hands with composers, dedicated her life to this art form. Now she sat on the board of the New York Philharmonic, and she had attended thousands of performances over the decades, but she had never heard anything quite like this. It wasn't just technical skill, though the technical skill was remarkable. This waitress, this young woman in a stained black uniform, was playing one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire from memory, without warming up, after what appeared to be years away from the instrument. That alone was almost impossible. But what made Catherine Webb's breath catch in her throat was something else entirely. It was the emotion. The raw, bleeding honesty pouring out of every note. This wasn't a performance. This was a confession. A prayer. A cry from somewhere so deep that most people never even knew it existed. Catherine turned to her husband. "Do you know who that is?" she whispered urgently. He shook his head, confused. "That's Elena Vasquez," Catherine said. "I saw her play at Carnegie Hall 15 years ago. She was just a child. 12 years old. I've never forgotten it." Her husband's eyes widened. "The prodigy? The one who disappeared?" "Yes." Catherine's voice was trembling. "Everyone thought she had died or given up or moved to another country. No one knew what happened to her. And here she is, playing at a charity gala, in a waitress uniform." Word began to spread through the crowd. Small whispers at first, then louder conversations. People pulled out their phones, typing quickly, searching for information. Articles appeared, old photographs, headlines from 15 years ago. 12-year-old virtuoso stuns, Carnegie Hall. The greatest young pianist of her generation. Elena Vasquez. A star is born. And then, the headlines from 7 years later. Tragic accident claims rising star's parents. Elena Vasquez withdraws from Juilliard. Music world mourns the loss of a prodigy. The pieces came together. People looked from their phones to the stage and back again, struggling to reconcile the smiling child in the old photographs with the young woman pouring her heart out on the piano. Richard Harrington noticed the commotion. He turned to one of his assistants with a frown. "What's going on?" he demanded. "Why is everyone on their phones?" The assistant showed him her screen. Richard's face went pale. On the stage, Elena had reached the most beautiful part of the ballade. The storm had passed. The fierce chords had given way to a melody so tender and heartbreaking that it seemed to hang in the air like morning mist. This was the passage her mother had loved most. They had worked on it together for weeks, trying to capture exactly the right feeling. Not sadness, her mother had explained. Something more complicated. The beauty that exists inside pain, the hope that survives even when everything else is gone. Elena thought about her mother as she played those notes. She thought about her father. She thought about all the years she had spent running away from this gift, because it hurt too much to use it. But it didn't hurt anymore. Or maybe it still hurt, but the hurt had transformed into something else. Something that needed to be expressed. Something that had been waiting 7 long years for this exact moment. Tears were streaming down her face now, But she didn't stop playing. She couldn't stop. The music had taken over, and she was just along for the ride. A passenger in her own body. Watching her fingers dance across the keys like they belonged to someone else. In the audience, people were crying too. Strangers dabbed at their eyes with napkins. Couples held hands. Even some of the servers, the people who worked alongside Elena every day without knowing anything about her past, stood frozen with tears on their cheeks. Richard Harrington had stopped watching. He stared at the floor, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had wanted to humiliate this girl. He had wanted to remind everyone in the room that people like her existed to serve people like him. Instead, he had given her a stage. And she had used it to show the world exactly who she was. The ballet was building toward its final climax now. The music grew louder, more intense, racing toward a conclusion that felt inevitable and impossible at the same time. Elena's hands moved so fast they were almost a blur. The piano sang and roared and whispered and screamed, all at once, all together, a lifetime of emotion compressed into a few blazing minutes. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The final notes rang out, soft and fading, like the last light of sunset disappearing below the horizon. Elena's hands lifted from the keys, her shoulders sagged, her eyes remained closed. The ballroom was completely silent. For one long, breathless moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even seemed to breathe. And then the room exploded. The applause hit Elena like a wave. It started from somewhere in the middle of the room, a single pair of hands clapping together, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was thundering with sound. People rose from their chairs, first one table, then two, then the entire room. 300 of Manhattan's wealthiest citizens stood on their feet, clapping so hard their palms stung, cheering for a waitress they had barely noticed an hour ago. Elena opened her eyes slowly, like someone waking from a dream. For a moment, she didn't understand what was happening. The faces in front of her were blurry, smeared by the tears still clinging to her eyelashes. The noise was overwhelming, crashing against her from every direction. Then it hit her. They were clapping for her. She looked down at her hands, still resting on the piano keys. These hands that had carried trays and scrubbed dishes and wiped down tables for 7 years. These hands that she thought had forgotten everything they once knew. They had just played Chopin like she had never stopped. The applause went on and on. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. People were shouting now, calling out words she couldn't quite hear over the roar. Some of them were crying openly, not even trying to hide their tears. Catherine Webb, the elderly woman who had recognized Elena from Carnegie Hall, pushed her way toward the front of the crowd. Her husband tried to hold her back, worried about the crush of bodies, but she shook him off with surprising strength. "Elena," she called out. "Elena Vasquez." The name rippled through the crowd like electricity. People who had been searching on their phones now looked up, connecting the name to the face on the stage. The whispers grew louder, spreading from table to table. "That's really her. The prodigy. The one who disappeared. I read about her years ago. I thought she was dead. How is she here? Why is she working as a waitress?" Elena heard fragments of these conversations floating up to her. She wanted to stand, to say something, but her legs felt like they were made of water. All those years of hiding, of being invisible, of pretending she was nobody special. And now, in the span of 15 minutes, her whole secret had been torn open for the world to see. Catherine Webb reached the edge of the stage. Her eyes were wet, her voice trembling with emotion. "My dear girl," she said, "I saw you play at Carnegie Hall when you were 12 years old. I have never forgotten it. Not for a single day. And tonight, you have given me one of the greatest gifts of my entire life." Elena didn't know what to say. Her throat was too tight for words. She simply nodded, her lips pressed together to keep from sobbing. Another woman approached the stage. It took Elena a moment to recognize her. The cream-colored dress. The dark stain of red wine spreading across the expensive fabric. The woman whose dress Elena had ruined. Elena braced herself for anger. for accusations, for demands that she still pay for the damage. But instead, the woman climbed the steps to the stage and pulled Elena into a tight embrace. "I am so sorry," the woman whispered into Elena's ear. "I am so sorry for how we treated you. I didn't know. None of us knew." Elena stood frozen in the woman's arms. She didn't understand. An hour ago, this same woman had screamed at her like she was worthless. Now she was apologizing? The woman pulled back, her eyes searching Elena's face. "Your parents would be so proud of you," she said softly. "I hope you know that." That was the moment Elena finally broke. The tears she had been holding back for 7 years came flooding out. Not just tears for tonight, but tears for everything. For her mother, who never got to see her grow up. For her father, who never got to walk her down the aisle or hold his grandchildren. For all the music she had kept locked inside because it hurt too much to let it out. She cried, and the woman held her, and the crowd watched in respectful silence. The applause had finally faded, replaced by something deeper. Something like understanding. Across the room, Richard Harrington stood alone. His friends had drifted away from him. One by one. The people who usually surrounded him, laughing at his jokes and agreeing with everything he said, had found reasons to be somewhere else. He could feel eyes on him, but not the admiring eyes he was used to. These eyes were cold, judging. He looked down at his phone. His assistant had been sending him messages non-stop for the past 10 minutes. "Sir, you need to see this. It's going viral. The videos are everywhere." Richard opened social media and felt his stomach drop. The videos had already been viewed millions of times. Not just Elena's performance, but everything that came before it. The moment he grabbed the microphone, the cruel smile on his face as he forced a waitress to perform for his entertainment, his mocking words, captured clearly by dozens of phones. "If you're good enough, if you can impress us, I'll personally forgive the debt." The comments were brutal. "This man is a monster." Imagine humiliating someone like this and finding out she's a world-class pianist. Richard Harrington tried to destroy a grieving orphan for content. Never forget. Her parents died, and she gave up everything to take care of her family. And this billionaire made fun of her. The story of Elena's past was spreading just as fast as the videos. People were digging up old articles, old photographs, old interviews. They were piecing together the tragedy of her life and sharing it with the world. And they were furious. Richard Harrington had built his reputation on being smart, on being ahead of the curve, on knowing how to read a room and control a narrative. But he had never experienced anything like this before. He had never been the villain. He tried to slip toward the exit, hoping to escape before things got worse. But a crowd had gathered near the doors, and they weren't letting anyone through easily. People wanted to talk about what had just happened. They wanted to share their shock, their tears, their outrage. A journalist who had been covering the gala for a society magazine spotted Richard trying to leave. She pushed through the crowd toward him, her phone already recording. "Mr. Harrington, do you have any comment on what just happened? Did you know who Elena Vasquez was when you forced her to perform?" Richard's face tightened. "No comment," he muttered, trying to push past her. But the journalist followed. "Were you aware that she lost both her parents in a car accident? That she dropped out of Juilliard to take care of her family? How do you feel about publicly humiliating someone with that kind of history?" I said no comment. More phones appeared, more cameras. Richard Harrington was surrounded, trapped by the very crowd he had once commanded so easily. The king of the room had become its prisoner. Back on stage, Elena had finally stopped crying. She sat on the piano bench, surrounded by people who wanted to shake her hand, to thank her, to tell her how much her performance had meant to them. She felt dazed, disconnected from her own body. Everything was happening too fast. An hour ago, she had been invisible. Now she was the center of attention in a way she hadn't experienced since she was a teenager. An older man in an expensive suit approached her with a business card in his hand. She recognized his face from somewhere, but she couldn't place it. "Miss Vasquez," he said, his voice warm but professional. "My name is Daniel Chen. I'm a music producer. I've worked with some of the biggest names in classical music for the past 30 years. Elena took the card, too overwhelmed to respond. I've been looking for you, Daniel continued. A lot of people have been looking for you. The music world never forgot what you could do. We just didn't know where you went. He paused, letting his words sink in. I don't know what your life looks like right now. I don't know what your plans are. But I want you to know that if you ever want to play again, professionally, there are people who would move mountains to make it happen. Elena stared at the card in her hand. It felt unreal. All of it. The applause, the apologies, the offer from a famous producer. After 7 years of struggle and invisibility, the universe was suddenly handing her everything she had lost. But even in that moment of triumph, her thoughts drifted somewhere else. She thought about her grandmother, waiting for her to come home. She thought about Diego, studying for his finals, dreaming about college. She thought about her mother and father, watching from somewhere she couldn't see. A small smile crossed her face, the first real smile she had allowed herself in a very long time. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. Maybe some gifts really couldn't be taken away. They could only be buried for a while. Elena didn't sleep that night. She sat in her grandmother's small apartment in the Bronx, still wearing her stained work uniform, watching her phone light up with notifications she couldn't bring herself to read. The silence of 3 a.m. wrapped around her like a blanket. Her grandmother had woken up when Elena came home. The old woman took one look at her granddaughter's face and knew something had happened. She didn't ask questions. She just made tea, sat beside Elena on the worn couch, and held her hand until she was ready to talk. When Elena finally told her everything, her grandmother cried. Not sad tears, happy ones. The kind that come when you've been waiting for something beautiful for a very long time, and it finally arrives. Your mother is dancing right now, her grandmother said, squeezing Elena's fingers. Wherever she is, she's dancing. I know it. Elena wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe her parents could see her, that they knew she hadn't given up, that she had finally found her way back to the music they had given her. Maybe she did believe it, just a little. The next morning, the world was different. Elena woke up to find that the videos from the gala had been viewed over 20 million times. Her name was trending on every social media platform. News outlets from around the world were running the story. The waitress who stunned a billionaire. The prodigy who returned. The greatest comeback nobody saw coming. Her phone had hundreds of missed calls and thousands of messages. Most of them were from strangers offering support, but some were from people she hadn't heard from in years. Old classmates from Juilliard, teachers who remembered her, friends she had pushed away after her parents died because the pain was too heavy to share. They all said the same thing. We're so proud of you. We never forgot you. Welcome back. Diego came home from school that afternoon to find reporters camped outside their building. He pushed through them without saying a word, ran up the stairs, and burst through the apartment door. Elena, he shouted. What's going on? Everyone at school is talking about you. There are people with cameras outside. Did you really play piano at some fancy party last night? Elena laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in longer than she could remember. Yeah, she said. I guess I did. Diego stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. He had been only 11 when their parents died. He barely remembered the concerts, the competitions, the life they had before everything fell apart. To him, Elena was just his big sister who worked too hard and worried too much. Now he was learning there was so much more to her story. Why didn't you ever tell me? He asked quietly. About all of it. About how good you were. Elena pulled him into a hug. He was taller than her now, almost a man, but in that moment, he felt like the little boy she had promised to protect all those years ago. Because it hurt too much to talk about, she said. And because I wanted you to have your own dreams, not to live in the shadow of mine. Diego hugged her back, tight and fierce. You're amazing, he whispered. You know that, right? You're the most amazing person I know. The weeks that followed moved faster than Elena could process. Daniel Chen, the music producer from the gala, called her the very next day. He wasn't the only one. Offers poured in from record labels, concert halls, television programs, and magazines. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. Everyone wanted to be part of her return. Elena took her time. She met with Daniel over coffee, then again for dinner, then again at his studio. She wanted to make sure this was right, that it was real, that she wasn't just a viral moment that would be forgotten next week. But Daniel saw something more in her. He saw the same thing Catherine Webb had seen at the gala. Not just talent, but truth. The kind of artistry that couldn't be manufactured or marketed. The kind that only came from living through something real. 3 months later, Elena released her first album. She recorded it in a small studio in Brooklyn, playing the pieces that meant the most to her. Chopin, of course, but also works by other composers she loved. And at the end of the album, a piece she had written herself, a melody that had been living inside her for 7 years, waiting for the right moment to come out. She called it For Rosa and Miguel, her parents' names. The album debuted at #1. Critics called it a masterpiece. They said it was raw, emotional, and deeply human. They said Elena Vasquez had done something rare in music. She had turned pain into beauty and shared it with the world. The money came in faster than Elena knew what to do with. She paid off her grandmother's medical bills first. Every single one. Then she set up a college fund for Diego so he would never have to worry about tuition or textbooks or any of the things that kept people awake at night. And then she did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She started a foundation. The Elena Vasquez Foundation provided scholarships and instruments to young musicians from underprivileged backgrounds. Kids who had talent, but no resources. Kids like she had been, before her mother found a way to give her a chance. Music saved my life, Elena said in an interview. I want to make sure other kids get the same opportunity. No matter where they come from or how much money their families have. The foundation grew quickly. Donations poured in from around the world. Famous musicians offered to teach master classes. Concert halls donated tickets. Within a year, over 200 young people had received support through the program. Elena visited the students whenever she could. She sat with them at pianos and violins and cellos, listening to them play, offering encouragement. Sometimes, she saw herself in their eyes. The hunger, the hope, the fear that they might not be good enough. You are enough, she told them. Trust me, you are more than enough. As for Richard Harrington, his story went in a very different direction. The public backlash from the gala never faded. If anything, it grew worse as more details emerged. Former employees came forward with stories of his cruelty. Business partners distanced themselves. Investors pulled out of his projects. Within 6 months, his company's stock had dropped by 40%. The board of directors quietly asked him to step down. The man who had once commanded rooms full of powerful people found himself increasingly alone. Elena didn't celebrate his downfall. She didn't feel joy at his suffering. When reporters asked her about him, she simply said, I hope he learns something from this. I hope he becomes a better person. Whether he did or not, she would probably never know. And honestly, it didn't matter to her. Richard Harrington had tried to use her as entertainment. Instead, he had accidentally given her the push she needed to reclaim her life. In a strange way, she was almost grateful. 1 year after the gala, Elena performed at Carnegie Hall for the first time since she was 12 years old. The concert sold out in 11 minutes. People flew in from other countries just to hear her play. The waiting list for tickets stretched into the thousands. Before she walked on stage, Elena stood in the wings and closed her eyes. She thought about her mother, sitting beside her at the piano when she was small. She thought about her father, crying, happy tears in the audience. She thought about all the years of struggle and silence and survival that had led to this moment. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. The stage manager gave her the signal. Elena took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked into the light. The audience rose to their feet before she even reached the piano. The applause washed over her like a wave, warm and welcoming, carrying her forward. She sat down at the bench. She looked out at the sea of faces, and she smiled. Then she placed her fingers on the keys, and she began to play. Some gifts can never be taken away. They can only be buried for a while. And sometimes, when the moment is right, they rise again, more beautiful than ever.